Between December 2024 and April of this year, a business in Orlando imported more than 60 wild sloths from Guyana and Peru. 57 of them are dead. Last Wednesday, the Orange County Sheriff's Office closed its criminal investigation into how that happened and concluded that no crime had occurred. They are, as far as I can tell, correct. But that's the part that's worth explaining. The business was called Sloth World, an interactive attraction near International Drive. $49 bought you a close-up encounter with a sloth. It never opened. It had still taken in roughly $500,000 in advance ticket sales, money collected for a rainforest that did not exist yet, from people promised an animal that had not survived the trip. The owner, Benjamin Agresta, later told investigators he had deliberately stayed out of the animal care side because that was somebody else's job. By April, after most of the staff resigned, that somebody else was Agresta and his fiancée. To understand what happened inside that warehouse, you need one fact about sloths, and it isn't the one about them being slow. The sloth doesn't really hold its own body temperature. It kind of borrows it. Core temperature drifts with the air around it, which is a reasonable strategy in a Guyanese forest because the sloth's digestion is outsourced to gut bacteria that only work when they're warm. And the forest is warm. Now those bacteria are doing an enormous amount of work. The sloths eat leaves, which are close to nutritionally worthless, and they process them at a pace that's hard to describe without sounding like a joke. Measured in captivity, food took more than 140 hours to pass through. That's 6 days. So they poop about once a week. Now, a cold sloth is not an uncomfortable sloth. It's a sloth whose digestive system has quietly powered down with a week of leaves still inside it. That first shipment they received, of 21 sloths, landed in Orlando in December 2024. The head caretaker, Peter Bondre, arrived a few days early and found an empty warehouse with no running water and no electricity. He later told investigators it was too late to cancel the shipment. Now, Central Florida also had an unusually cold week. And of course, their space heaters failed. So the animal spent at least one night in the cold. All 21 died. But the next shipment was 10 more. And you guessed it, those died too. So now here's where this stops being a story about one man in a warehouse. Every one of those sloths entered the United States legally through customs at Miami International with their paperwork in order. Nobody was hiding anything because there was nothing that needed hiding. The United States brings in more than 90 million wild animals a year for the pet trade alone, not counting research, fashion, trophy hunting, or roadside attractions like this one. One of the largest, least examined supply chains on the planet, and it's all almost entirely above board. In April, an analysis in Science covering 40 years of trade records found that species moved through the global wildlife trade were about 50% more likely to share pathogens with humans than species that weren't. The effect held for legal and illegal trade almost equally. The autopsies on the Sloth World animals read like a demonstration of it. Parasites, bacteria, viruses, distended stomachs, pneumonia. A veterinarian warned the company that pathologists thought they might have found something new. One epidemiologist who spent a decade at the CDC called the trade pandemic roulette. He wasn't talking about Sloth World specifically, but Sloth World is just what it looks like when you can watch a single spin of that roulette. So this brings us back to the warehouse and to the agency that was watching it the entire time. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission heard about Sloth World on December 9th, 2024, 9 days before the first sloth had landed. A member of the public called to say a new business was hiring staff and expecting a shipment of sloths within days. An FWC employee checked, found no permits associated with the business, the owner, or the address, and emailed an investigator. The investigator went to look 8 months later. By then, at least 31 sloths were already dead. Now, that inspection in August 2025 found 6 living sloths on site. Import records in the agency's own possession showed 44 had come in. The report accounted for 37. There's no indication anyone asked about the other 7. 7 missing sloths. And it produced no enforcement action. The investigator explained why to a colleague, and his explanation is this whole video in one sentence. He said that the revocation of licenses usually involves a finding of some form of intentional malconduct or demonstration of an inability or unwillingness to comply with captive wildlife rules. So within 10 days, 2 more sloths were dead. In January, a fresh tip reported an Orlando facility holding around 80 sloths and losing animals in transport. It was closed out already, as investigated and cleared. Between the August inspection and the end of January, at least 17 more sloths died. The autopsy records from that stretch are not funny, and I'm not going to make them funny. They had severely sunken-in eyes. They were suspected of emaciation and weakness from the stress of their travel. There were spinal hemorrhages that may have also reflected acute trauma. Moving forward to February and early March, Sloth World imported 14 more. March brought another round of inspections. Officials counted 28 sloths and described enclosures decorated with fake greenery on wooden lattices. They found no violations of Florida law. On March 20th, an FWC official recommended issuing the owner a new exhibition permit so he can move forward with federal licensing. Another slide the next day of mouth ulcers and diarrhea. So the federal government was not absent. It was worse than absent. The USDA said in writing in March that it had a lot of animal welfare concerns, but its authority over exhibited animals begins when a business is licensed to exhibit animals, and Sloth World had not opened yet. So reporters asked every agency involved one simple question: who is responsible for disease oversight of imported wildlife? The CDC pointed to the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Interior Department, which runs the Fish and Wildlife Service, pointed back to the CDC, the USDA, and the states. Florida's Wildlife Agency pointed to the USDA and to Florida's Agricultural Department. Florida's Agricultural Department said it had been named in error and the Wildlife Agency has the primary role. So that's not a gap in the system, because a gap implies edges. This is just not a system. So on April 21st, after the story broke, FWC's internal notes recorded that the sloth count had dropped from 26 to 13 in 6 weeks, with no explanation of where the animals had gone, and that another veterinarian had quit. The notes reached the same conclusion the agency had reached every previous time. No captive wildlife FWC violations observed. Rick will closely monitor the situation. Florida's cruelty statute requires that an animal be unnecessarily tormented or deprived of care by someone who meant to do it. An animal law professor at the University of Denver called the outcome a gross miscarriage of justice, and also said she wasn't surprised by it, because those two things are not in tension. The deputy applied the statute correctly, and the statute is what it is. The thing I keep coming back to isn't that the system failed. It's that nothing in it was ever load-bearing. Every agency that looked at Sloth World did what it was built to do, which was just look at it. Fake greenery on wooden lattices, inspected in daylight by a professional, compliant with the care and housing standards. So 57 sloths died, over the course of however long this business ran, and however many inspections that it endured. But it seems that everybody only wants to think about the 13 sloths that made it out of that warehouse in April. They might not have looked into it further. 5 of them died at the zoo just afterward. But there are still 8 alive, and by all accounts, they seem to be in no particular hurry.